Today we're going to be learning about the nets of prisms. I'm going to start off by reminding you what prisms are. A prism is a 3D object that has the same shape on both ends. So here's an example of a 3D object, and if we look at an X-ray view of this object, you'll see that I've got over here a triangle, and on the other end I've got the exact same triangle. So those are what we call our base shapes. So a prism is a 3D object that has the same shape on both ends, which we call the base shape. And then it also has rectangles that go around the prism. Those are what we call the lateral faces. Also, a prism will have a constant cross section. That means that if you cut it somewhere between the two ends, then what you're going to end up with is another shape that looks exactly the same as the base shape as well. So it has a constant cross section. Okay, now let's have a look at some examples of prisms. Over here I've got a special prism called a cube, which has got squares on all the faces. Okay, then we also have the cuboid, which is also known as a rectangular prism, because it has got rectangles on the ends, but it also has rectangles on all the faces. So any set of opposite sides could be considered the base shape of this particular kind of prism. Okay, then we've also got a square prism. Now, square prisms have got a square on both ends, that's the base shape, and it has rectangles around the lateral faces. Over here we've got another example where you've got squares on the two ends, or the base shape, that's the front and the back, and we've got rectangles for our lateral faces. Then we've got the triangular prism. We've got triangles on the front and the back. Those are our base shapes, and we've got rectangles going around the lateral faces. And we've got over here another example, also triangle on the front and the back, and we've got rectangles for the lateral faces. Okay, now prisms are generally named based on the base shape of the prism. So triangular prisms will have triangles for the base shape. Square prisms will have squares for the base shape. Rectangular prisms, or cuboids, will have rectangles for the base shape. You also get other prisms as well. You get pentagonal prisms and hexagonal prisms and octagonal prisms and so on. And those are also named according to the base shape. So a pentagonal prism will have pentagons as the base shape. A hexagonal prism will have hexagons as the base shape, and so on. Okay, now let's go and have a look at the nets for prisms. In this activity, you are going to actually build models of these prisms using the net that matches the one that you can see over here. So if you've got the worksheets that go with this lesson, you can just use the net that is provided. Otherwise, you can take a screenshot of the screen here quickly, and then you can print that to be able to do this activity. Okay, so what you're going to do to build it is you're going to cut it out on the solid lines, and then you're going to fold on all the dotted lines and use glue to stick all the tabs down in order to build your model. Once you've built it, I want you then to write down the name of the 3D object that you end up with. Okay, so I want you to just quickly pause the video to go and do that, and then you can come back and we can have a look at what you should end up with. Okay, so now let's have a look at what your 3D shape should look like. You should have ended up with something that looks like this. So we've got over here a 3D object that has squares all the way around on all the faces. This is what we call a cube. So you should have found over here that the name is a cube for this particular 3D object. Right, now let's do the next one. You're going to do the exact same thing for this one. This one you've got a net that looks like this. Again, if you've got the worksheet, you can just use the net that is provided. Otherwise, you can take a screenshot of the screen as it is over here so that you can build the model and do this activity. Okay, so just like with the previous one, once you've built it, I want you then to write down the name of the 3D object that you end up with. So you can pause the video quickly and you can go and do that, and then you can come back. Okay, so let's have a look at what you should have ended up with for this one. So for this particular one, you should have ended up with something that looks like this. So I've got over here a triangle on this end and a triangle, the exact same triangle on the other end as well. And then I've got rectangles that go around for the lateral faces of this prism. And this is what we call a triangular prism. So over here, you should have found that the name for this prism is a triangular prism. Okay, and now you're going to do the last one that you're going to be building the model for, and that's this one over here. So once again, if you don't have the net, you can just take a screenshot over here quickly, and then you can print it out to do this activity. Once you have built this model, I want you again to write down the name of the object that you end up with. So you can go and pause the video and you can do that quickly. Okay, so let's have a look at what you should have ended up with for this one. So you should have found that you get something that looks like this. It's a box that has rectangles that are identical to each other on the two sides over here. Then these two rectangles are also identical to each other on the two sides, and these ones are also the same on the two ends over here. So that is what we call a cuboid or a rectangular prism. So the name that you should have got over here is either a cuboid or a rectangular prism. It doesn't matter which name you choose, they are both correct. Okay, now let's go on to our next activity. In this activity, we are going to be practicing drawing rough sketches of the nets for each of these prisms. So the first prism we've got over here is a square-based prism. Okay, so when you're doing these sketches, you don't have to do everything completely accurately to the millimeter or anything, but what I do want you to do is I want you to try and make it accurate in terms of making sure that if lines are supposed to be the same length as each other, that they are the same length as each other. So they need to look pretty accurate, okay? You don't have to measure everything perfectly, but they do need to look correct. Okay, so I'm going to give you 1 minute to draw the net for this object. Okay, so let's take a look at what your net should look like. So for this particular prism, you should have 2 squares, and then you should have 4 rectangles for the lateral faces that go around the prism. Okay, so now this is not necessarily the only option that you could have for your net. You could have the shapes placed slightly differently. You just need to make sure that if you were to build this, if you were to use your net to try and build the prism, you wouldn't have any faces that are overlapping, and you need to make sure that you have the correct number of each of the faces. Also, make sure that the rectangles are the correct size. So you can see that they are very narrow. The distance between the two ends over here is very short. So they are narrow rectangles, but it needs to be the same length as the side of the square. So all of these rectangles need to be the same length as the side of each of these 2 squares. So this is one option for what you could have for your net for this particular prism. Okay, now you're going to do the next one. So for this one, once again, I want you to make a rough sketch for the net of this prism. And I'm going to give you 1 minute for this one as well. Okay, so let's have a look at what your net should look like. So for this one over here, you should have 3 rectangles for the lateral faces and 2 triangles for the 2 ends. Okay, now when you're doing the nets for prisms, it's generally easiest to have all the lateral faces in a row between the 2 ends or the base shapes. Okay, so that's just the easiest way to do the net. But as I said, it's not the only option. So you might have done yours looking slightly different to this. And so long as you make sure that all of the faces, if you were to try and build it, all the faces are there, so you don't have anything missing, and you don't have any extra faces as well. And also make sure that there are no faces will end up overlapping with each other when you are drawing a sketch of a net. Okay, now let's have a look at our next activity. Now in this activity over here, you have got a prism and you need to identify all the correct nets for this particular prism. So in this case over here, you've got a cube and there are 8 different nets that have been drawn for this cube. You need to identify which of these nets are correct because not all of them are. Okay, so when you're doing this, I want you to look at it and I want you to try and imagine if you were to use each of these nets to try and build the prism, if it would work or not. You need to make sure that none of the faces would overlap each other and also that you have the correct number of each of the faces and also the correct shape for each of the faces. Okay, so I want you to look at each of these individual nets and I want you to try and see which ones will work to build a cube and which ones won't. If you have the worksheets that go with this lesson, you can just circle the correct answers, but if you don't have the worksheets, you can use the numbers over here and you can just write down the numbers of all the correct nets. Okay, so I'm going to give you 1 minute to work on this activity. Okay, so let's go through each of those. So number 1 over here, this net is a standard net for a cube. This one works. Okay, so that one's correct. Then this one over here, you've also got your 4 squares that would also be your lateral faces, and then 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom. Those could be your 2 bases. So this one is also correct. Now this one over here, if these are your lateral faces going around the sides, then these 2 are both on the same end, which means that they would overlap with each other. So this one is not correct. And this is the exact same thing. If these are your lateral faces, the 4 going around, then you have 2 on the back and nothing on the front. So these 2 would also overlap with each other. So this is also not correct. Now for this one, these 2 faces would end up overlapping if we were to try and build it. So this is not correct. The same thing happens with this one over here. If I were to try and build this, these 2 would also overlap with each other. So this isn't correct. This one, if you try and build it, it will work. This is a correct one. And this one as well will also work. That's also a correct one. So what you should have got is the numbers 1, 2, 7, and 8. These are the correct nets for the cube in this example over here. Okay, so now you're going to do the exact same thing for the next one over here. Here we've got a triangular prism. And once again, you need to identify which of the nets that have been provided over here will work to build this particular triangular prism. Now, for this one, you need to be more careful. You need to actually look at the lengths of the sides and the lengths of the rectangles to see which ones will work and which ones won't. And once again, if you don't have the worksheets, you can just use the numbers over here to write down which ones are correct. Okay, so I'm going to give you 1 minute for this activity as well. Okay, so let's go through that quickly. So with this one, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you first which ones are correct, and then I'm going to talk you through quickly why the other ones are not correct. Okay, so the first one, number 1, this is correct. The second one is also correct. The third one is also correct. And then the sixth one is correct. Now let's quickly talk about why the other ones are not correct. So for this one over here, if you look at it, I've got a rectangle there, there, and there around this. So this could be the base, the bottom triangle over here. And these are the rectangles that go around it. Now they look like they should be fine, but then you've got this one over here, which is the opposite way around to that. Now, because it's not a mirror image of this triangle, if you were to try and build it, this triangle is the wrong way around to actually be in this position over here. It would be going the other way. Okay, so you would have a triangle going like this instead of a triangle going like that. Okay, so that's why that one doesn't work. Then with this one over here, we've got our 3 rectangles in a row for the lateral faces, and then the 2 triangles are both on the same side as each other over here. So that means that they would both either be the top or the bottom, so they would overlap with each other. So this one doesn't work for that reason. Then this one over here, we've got our rectangles for our lateral faces all in a row, so that's fine. We've got our triangles on opposite sides, so that's fine. But if you look at the triangles, we've got a problem here, because the longest side of the triangle would end up going along with this rectangle, which is the shortest rectangle, so they don't match up. So this is not going to work because they're not the right lengths for each other. These sides over here should be the same length as each other, and the same thing at the bottom over here. So that's why this one doesn't work. And then this one is going to be very similar. We've also got our rectangles for the lateral faces in a row like that, so that's fine. We've got our triangles on opposite ends, so that's fine. This one looks like it's okay, but this one over here, the exact same thing is happening as what we had over there. We've got the longest side in our triangle that should match with this one over here, which is the shortest rectangle, so they don't match. They should be the same length as each other, and that's why that one doesn't work. So that's what you should have got for question B. The correct nets here are 1, 2, 3, and 6. Okay, and then the last one you're going to do in this lesson is the exact same thing for this prism over here, a square-based prism. So once again, I want you to look at which of the provided nets are correct and will actually work to build this prism. Again, here are some numbers for if you don't have the worksheets that go with this lesson. Okay, so I'm going to give you 1 minute for this one as well. Okay, so let's go through these ones over here. So just like the last one, I'm going to first show you which ones are correct, and then I will explain to you why the other ones are not correct. So the first one that's correct is number 3 over here. Then the next one is number 5. Then number 6 is correct, and number 8 is correct. So let's have a look at why the other ones are not correct. So this one over here, there's something that you should have picked up pretty much straight away, and that's that there are 3 squares. Now, your square-based prism should only have 2 squares for the 2 ends of the prism. So that's why this one isn't correct. There's an extra square. Okay, so that's not going to work. Then this one over here, we've got our 4 rectangles, which are the lateral faces, going around the prism. And then the 2 squares over here are on the same side of the lateral faces over here. So both of them will be on the top, or both of them will be on the bottom, and they're going to overlap, and there's nothing on the other end over here. So that's why that one is incorrect. Then this one over here, this one is actually kind of going the other way around to what we normally would. Here you've got a square, and then a rectangle, and then a square, and then a rectangle, if you look along like this over here. So this one, we are looking at that like that. And then next to the square, we've got this square over here. We've got a rectangle going down, so that's fine. And then over here, we have got another rectangle, but the problem is it is on the same side as that one. So they're both either on the front or they're both on the back. So these two are going to end up overlapping with each other. And then this one over here, I've got 2 squares and I've got 4 rectangles. So that's the right number of each of the faces. But if you look at this over here, these two are not lying correctly. The rectangle should be end to end with the square. There shouldn't be anything like this where you've got a shape that is kind of up against the bottom part of another shape or something. They should be end to end. So this one is not correct as well for that reason. Okay, and that's what you should have got for that activity. So the correct ones were 3, 5, 6, and 8. And that is how you work with the net of prisms. Now that we've learned the concepts in this lesson, it's important to practice, practice, practice. If you haven't already got the worksheet that goes with this video, you can find it by clicking on the link in the description below. The worksheet comes with an extra exercise full of questions for you to work on to master the concepts covered in this lesson. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button so that others can benefit from it too. Also, be sure to subscribe so that you can easily find my other lessons, and hit the bell so that you will get notified about lessons as I upload them.